Hello guys, and welcome to day 8 of our challenge. Well done on your work so far. Thank you very much for sharing and being active in our group. So today I'm going to talk about one-to-one teaching versus group teaching online, but I think most of the points that I'll mention are also relevant in face-to-face settings. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the attention from the teacher in one-to-one classes. So as we all know, in one-to-one classes, the students get a lot of attention from the teacher. And I think that's just a very natural thing. And in group classes, we've got more students, so obviously less attention per student, and I think it's okay. The one-to-one classes are usually more expensive, so that's what the students are paying for, so that's an obvious difference. My second point is peer interaction. In group classes, peer interaction is something natural. Lots of us would very often ask our students to work in pairs or in groups to compare answers. I think in my own classes, pair work is some sort of a default mode of or interaction pattern. However, in one-to-one classes, that's quite limited. I've had one idea that maybe you'll find useful in order to kind of give your one-to-one students a chance to interact with their peers, which I think has lots of advantages. I think it's important for people to be able to interact with other students who are at a similar level rather than only being exposed to the perfect or nearly perfect models of the language from their teacher. So I thought that it would be really nice if you could reach out to teachers who live perhaps even in another country. You can do that via this group. Ask any teachers if they have any one-to-one students who would like to become pen pals. They could write emails to each other, they could share their work. I think it's quite important to have an audience as well, and obviously the teacher is usually the audience, but I think it would be really, really nice to have somebody else, and I think it makes it very motivating if it's a real person who is from another country. I think the students could motivate each other well. Okay, so my third point is this ultimate question that a lot of people ask. Are one-to-one lessons boring? So I know a lot of teachers who say they really hate teaching one-to-ones because of that, because they think that's not really interesting for the teacher, not really interesting for the students. Or perhaps there are only a certain type of students who want to have one-to-one classes. They are very often quite focused on their goals. They are not really likely to engage in games or more fun activities. They just want to reach their goal, which is fine, which is absolutely okay, and it's still a valid reason to choose to have one-to-one lessons. However, it can become a bit of a problem. So I think that in order to make lessons a little bit more engaging, we should try and vary them as much as possible. In group settings, varying interactions and varying activities is obviously much easier. But I think a lot of the activities that we would do with our groups can be easily translated to one-to-one teaching. Using Quizlet, using Kahoot can be done as easily in one-to-one classes. Also, I think it's quite important to mix different ways of teaching. I think as an experienced teacher, I would always have my similar lesson structure of setting the context, then some sort of introduction of the language and work on the language, then practicing the language, so that at the end of the lesson I can easily measure the lesson's aims and outcomes. However, I think if every now and again we flip the lessons, and that's something I'm going to talk about tomorrow, that could add this element of something interesting and a little bit more engaging perhaps. So actually that leads to my other point, which is varying activities. So I think that even if you are teaching a one-to-one student, you can still ask them to do lots of things by themselves, and then ask them to only come and meet you for feedback. Obviously, it needs introduction. Some students are sometimes quite reluctant to change. They are used to their kind of how they imagine the lessons would be, and that the teacher should always be this provider and someone who leads the lesson. But I think we should expose our students to different types of teaching and interaction between the teacher and the student. And this leads to my last point, which is self-study. I think self-study, when you first hear it, it can sound as something really, really boring and not very exciting, such as reading a text and answering a few questions. I think it can be so much more than it. Why don't you look for some games or interactive lessons that your student can do outside your class? Have a look at website that actually one of my colleagues or our colleagues has created. It's called Talkback. It's a wonderful resource for teachers, but I'm going to talk about the resource for teachers a little bit tomorrow. There is also an app for students where they can study by themselves. There are interactive lessons in which they not only have to click on the correct picture, like in Duolingo or any applications like that. They have to say things, they have to write things, match things. It's really, really interesting and interactive. So please have a look at it and recommend it to your students. Talkback, I'm going to give a link to it in the description of this video. And look for other ways. Ask your students to record videos of themselves or their voice when they're presenting some point that you've asked them to research, or some presentation that you want them to do. This can obviously be very easily linked to the thing that I've mentioned before. It can be shared with a person from another country who is also a student. They could comment on each other's work. I think this way it could be even more motivating and engaging. Okay, so I think that's it for today. These are the main things that I think make one-to-ones a little bit different from group teaching. Please share your thoughts on this topic, and please tell us in what kind of setting you normally teach, and what are the challenges. Do you find one-to-ones more challenging than groups teaching, or maybe the other way around? And please share any thoughts, ideas, or activities that you normally do in your one-to-one versus group classes. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.